Hello, thank you for joining with me. We are in A Course in Miracles, complete and annotated edition, edited by Robert Perry, the 2017 Purple Book. Today we are on day 56, chapter 3, section 6, The Divided Mind. If you'll please close your eyes and join me in the prayer on page 91 of the same book. Dear Father, I would like to pray that my will be united with thine, recognizing that thy perfect love will correct for my imperfect love. I pray that I may accept the atonement with conviction, recognizing its inestimable worth and my own divine worth as part of this identification with thine. I pray that my fear be replaced by an active sense of thy love and thy continual willingness to help me overcome the split or divided will, which is responsible for my difficulty with this. I accept the divinity of the messages I have received and affirm my will in both accepting and acting upon the atonement principle. Lord, here I am. Amen. So we are on day 56, section 6 of chapter 3, The Divided Mind. We are reading paragraphs 1 through 9 today. Most of the abilities you now possess are only shadows of your real strengths. Your spirit knows, loves, and creates. These are its unequivocal functions. All of your present functions are unequivocal or open to question or doubt. This arises because you can no longer be certain how you will use them. You are therefore incapable of knowledge because you are uncertain. You are also incapable of true loving because you can perceive lovelessly. Excuse my dog barking. And you cannot create surely because perception deceives and illusions are not sure. Perception did not exist until the separation had introduced degrees, aspects, and intervals. The spirit has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. Wars arise when some regard others as if they were on a different level. All interpersonal conflicts arise from this fallacy. Only the levels of the Trinity are capable of unity. The levels produced by the separation are disastrous. They cannot but conflict. This is because one is essentially meaningless to another. Freud realized this perfectly, and that is why he conceived as forever irreconcilable the different levels of his psyche. They were conflict-prone by definition because they wanted different things and obeyed different principles. Footnote 63. In Freud's topography of the mind, the id, pursues immediate satisfaction of needs, the pleasure principle. The ego seeks to be realistic and socially appropriate, the reality principle, and the superego pursues what is morally right and even perfect. These very different goals result in a state of constant, unavoidable conflict. In our picture of the psyche, there is an unconscious level which properly consists only of the miracle ability and should be under my direction, and a conscious level which perceives or is aware of impulses from both the unconscious and the superconscious. These are the sources of the impulses that the conscious level receives. Consciousness is thus the level of perception, but not knowledge. Again, to perceive is not to know. In this connection, Casey is more accurate than Freud. Footnote 64. The Edgar Casey readings teach that the highest level of the mind is the superconscious, the same term used by Jesus. The superconscious, which is the level of the spirit, is all-knowing and at one with God. Consciousness was the first split that you introduced into yourself. You became a perceiver rather than a creator in the true sense. Consciousness is correctly identified as the domain of the ego. Footnote 65. This is the Course's first reference to the ego, which is here still somewhat within Freudian bounds. Later on, the Course will see the ego as having its foundations sunk deeply in the unconscious, as opposed to residing in the conscious mind. For instance, it speaks of the darkest and the deepest cornerstone in the ego's foundation, and says it guards this one secret with its life. Sorry, fly. For its existence does depend on keeping this secret. Text, chapter 13, section 2. Jung was right indeed in insisting that the ego is not the self, and that the self should be regarded as an achievement. Footnote 66. Jung contrasted the ego and the self in this way. I therefore distinguish between the ego and the self, since the ego is only the subject of my consciousness, while the self is the subject of my total psyche, which also includes the unconscious. C.G. Jung, 1921, Psychological Types, or The Psychology of Individuation, Collected Works, Volume 6. And then 425. In terms of the self being an achievement, Jung taught that the unification of our many voices into a cohesive self is a hard-won attainment that happens in one's mature years. It's about that time for me, huh? Sorry. All right. He did not recognize, a term we now understand, that the achievement was God's. In a sense, the ego was a self-made attempt to perceive yourself as you wished, rather than as you are. This is an example of the created/creator confusion we spoke of before. Footnote 67. Text chapter 2, part 2. We have commenced before on the fundamental error involved in confusing what has been created with what is being made. And then chapter 2, that was chapter 2, section 2. This is chapter 2, section 11. One of the chief ways in which you can correct your own magic miracle confusion is to remember that you did not create yourself. You can only know yourself as you are, because that is all you can be sure of. Everything else is open to question. The ego is the questioning compartment in the post-separation psyche which you made for yourself. It is capable of asking questions, but not of perceiving wholly valid answers. Let me repeat that because I choked. It is capable of asking questions, but not of perceiving wholly valid answers, because these are of knowledge and cannot be perceived. The endless speculation about the meaning of mind has led to considerable confusion, because the mind is confused. Only one-mindedness is without confusion. A separated or divided mind must be confused. A divided mind is uncertain by definition. It has to be in conflict because it is out of accord with itself. Intrapersonal conflict arises from the same basis as interpersonal. One part of the psyche perceives another part as on a different level and does not understand it. This makes the parts stranger to each other without recognition. This is the essence of the fear-prone condition in which attack is always possible. You have every reason to feel anxious as you perceive yourself. This is why you cannot escape from fear until you know that you did not and cannot create yourself. You can never make this misperception valid, and when you at last perceive clearly, you will be glad you can't. Your creation is beyond variance by your own errors, and this is why you must eventually choose to heal the separation. Footnote 68. Error variance. The original wording here was your creation beyond your error variance, is a term from psychological testing that refers to all the variability in the data that does not come from the factor the test is trying to measure. Error variance, in other words, refers to all the things influencing the data that we aren't interested in. In Jesus' application of the term, error variance seems to mean our own errors causing variance in the data of our reality, something he says is impossible. Right-mindedness is not to be confused with the knowing mind, because it is applicable only to the right perception. You can be right-minded or wrong-minded, and this is subject to degrees, a fact which clearly demonstrates a lack of association with knowledge. The term right-mindedness is properly used as the correction for wrong-mindedness and applies to the state of mind which induces accurate perception. It is miraculous because it heals misperception, and healing is indeed a miracle in view of how you perceive yourself. Only the sick need healing. The spirit does not need healing, but the mind does. Freud gave a very graphic but upside-down account of how the divisions of the mind arose from the bottom up. Footnote number 69. Freud said that the ego developed like a skin over the unconscious. He believed that the ego developed from the id, which is in the unconscious, and then the superego developed from the ego. So for him, the structure of the psyche grew upward out of the unconscious. Jesus says later in this paragraph that it happened the other way around. A choice to separate made in the superconscious gave birth to the conscious mind. And then the conscious mind's act of pushing material outside of it gave birth to the unconscious. Actually, this is impossible because the unconscious cannot generate the conscious. You cannot create something you can't know. The ego, therefore, did not arise out of the unconscious. A lower order perception cannot produce a higher order one because it doesn't understand it. But a higher order perception can produce a lower order one by understanding it in terms of misperception. Perception always involves some misuse of the will because it involves the mind in errors of uncertainty. The mind is very active because it has willpower. When it willed the separation, it willed to perceive. Until it chose to do this, it willed only to know. Afterwards, it had to will ambiguously, and the only way out of ambiguity, I can't say that word. Ambiguity is clear perception. I wish my husband were around more often. He could help me with a lot of my errors. Okay, day 56. This is Emily Watson's from the Course Companions, which is a group on Facebook. Day 56. Today is June 3rd. Section 6. It's the 4th? Third. Section 6, the divided mind, paragraphs 1 through 9. Knowledge in the Course is overview, I apologize. Knowledge in the Course is a state of direct union with true reality, meaning a state where all forms of perception do not exist. The reason we are incapable of knowledge is because we can perceive lovelessly. By going beyond the conscious mind to the superconscious, our current abilities will ultimately be replaced by our unequivocal strengths, knowing, loving, and creating. Reflections. Paragraph 9 notes that the mind is very active because it has willpower. When it willed the separation, it willed to perceive. This is why, as the section also notes, the spirit does not need healing, but the mind does. In other words, the spirit, the innocence, parentheses, the innocence and perfection in us that comes from God, parentheses, close, is eternally whole, but the mind can perceive itself as lacking. And this is what needs to be healed. Until that happens, the intrapersonal conflict arising from our divided mind will continue to cause intrapersonal conflicts with others. Based on everything you've read in the Course so far, how do you think God would want you to respond to your divided mind? Key passages. Your spirit knows, loves, and creates. These are its unequivocal functions. A separated or divided mind must be confused. A divided mind is uncertain by its definition. It has to be in conflict because it is out of accord with itself. Thank you for joining with me, Day 56, Section 6, The Divided Mind. If you are inspired to do so, please join Course Companions on Facebook and share your experience going through the book. Thank you so much. I love you. Have a beautiful day.